Hello. In this time of a crisis and isolation and wanting to connect more virtually and online, I thought I would create a video about a favourite writer and a favourite novel of mine and just share it. And I'd really love to start a conversation. Just to preface this video by saying I'm very aware what I look like. I'm very aware that my hair looks like this. I'm not very good with doing my own hair, so even if I tried to do something to it, I'm not sure what it would look like. But yeah, this is how it sits. And I'm very aware I also have no makeup on, because I thought if I actually took time to do that, to put makeup on, that I'd chicken out and wouldn't do this video, so you can just accept me as I am. So the writer I want to talk about is Ethel White, who was a writer of the kind of golden era of crime fiction in the 1930s. And yeah, I'd never heard of her before I saw an adaptation of her work on the BBC. And then I discovered her work, and I just think she's such an incredible writer of fiction that I thought I would talk about one of my favourites. It kind of changes quite often, my favourite of hers. Oh, also just to say as well, I'm very aware that as I haven't filmed a video on social media before, I did a really short one, which was silent, which is just me kind of twirling in a 1920s black dress on Instagram, so check that out if you'd like. But I've not really done any video content before, and I'm also just filming this just myself, using my arm to film on, so it might be a bit shaky, so I apologise. And I'm trying to film this before it goes dark, because I don't have any lighting either. So we'll see how this goes. So yes, so Ethel White is a Welsh writer. I've been collecting first and second editions of her work, so I thought if I first just show you those novels that I've been collecting. So these are just some of them. Just to say as well, like, I'm not bragging, I just wanted to talk about this. I've bought most of these on eBay really cheaply. As she's not Agatha Christie, most people don't know her. Her work you can pick up quite cheaply. And I just loved these early editions of her work, and I really started to collect them. Quite a few of these didn't come with their original dust jackets. There's a great company in San Francisco who create copies of the original dust jackets, which I bought, and really beautiful, and this is part of my collection. So a lot of these were published in the 1930s, 1940s, mainly by the Crime Club, but some by Wardlock and Cohen Collins, if you're interested in early publishers. I don't know many people that are, but I find it interesting. And so the novel I want to talk about is this. So it's called The Wheel Spins. This is actually a photograph of Ethel White here on the back. Oh, and I should say as well, so Ethel White, is a Welsh writer. She was born in Abergavenny in Wales. She was born actually in the 1870s, and she did write as a child, and she did write short stories before, but her first novel was published in 1927, so when she was in her 50s, which I think is really inspiring. And most of her novels come out in kind of the 30s. And a few in the 40s as well. And she's mainly crime fiction, not all, but most of her novels are crime fiction. And so she gets compared to Agatha Christie a lot. And I love Agatha Christie. I think there are similarities there. Obviously, they're both writing in the 30s about a very particular society. They both have really great dark humour and dry wit. But I find Ethel White's novels, I think why I'm so drawn to them is they're incredibly feminist, I think. They're definitely, tick the Bechdel test. You often have women in them who support each other, so it's often a woman who's in danger who either saves herself or saves other women. And yeah, I really like her work. Oh, that is not better. So yeah, and so the copy I actually want to read from is this really beautiful, this is a paperback of Lady Vanishes. So I should say, the reason I discovered Ethel White's work is I saw a BBC adaptation a while ago of The Lady Vanishes with Tuppence Middleton as the main character starring, and I just really appealed to me. So it's in the 1930s on a train, and it's about a woman who meets a character, Miss Froy. So Iris Carr meets Miss Froy on the train, and she goes to sleep, she wakes up, she's also had a head injury, and Miss Froy's disappeared, and nobody in her carriage and nobody remembers seeing her, but Iris very vividly knows that Miss Froy exists and that she disappeared and that something has gone wrong and there's some mystery afoot and that she has to save her. This woman that she's never met before, and it's really, I think, very heroic as a character, and it is a really feminist tale of kind of voices, women's voices being listened to. So anyway, and so I discovered the BBC adaptation, and then I went back and saw the incredible Hitchcock films. So if anybody knows Lady Vanishes, I'll probably know it from the Hitchcock film. And this book, this paperback, is actually a movie tie-in. And I hadn't realised, so I discovered this, that movie time with books happens so early. So this is obviously photographs from the film. So the original book, as it was called, The Wheel Spins, came out in 1936. And Alfred Hitchcock adapted it in 1938. It came out a few years later and called it The Lady Vanishes. And so this is Margaret Lockwood and Michael Redgrave starring, both really incredible in the film. And on the back is, I love it, another still from the film, an action shot of Michael Redgrave entering one of the train carriages. And this, I don't think actually happens in the film. Sorry, it doesn't happen in the book. The film, actually, I have to say, the book adaptation is much similar to the plot of the book. The Lady Vanishes film is quite different. So as it came out just pre Second World War, it definitely has a kind of pro-war angle to it. Some of the female characters, are just sort of not, they get changed to male characters basically in it, some of the supporting cast, and then also the female protagonist I mentioned, Iris Carr, who's kind of a wealthy orphaned woman in her early 20s. She also in the film, the male character in it, played by Michael Redgrave, discovers that she's telling the truth much earlier on, and kind of supports her much earlier than it happens in the book, which I thought was an interesting change. So yeah, so it is quite different, but it's a really good film. I would definitely recommend, and it was the last film that Hitchcock made in the UK before he went to America, and it's been on the BBC actually quite a few times. You can watch it. So I thought, yeah, I would read a bit from this novel. So Ethel White wrote 17 novels. I have most of them in hardback. Some are quite elusive to find. They just don't seem to come up online. Or I've also looked in bookshops and Hay on Wye as well, because they have a whole crime bookshop there. Yeah, so I've got most of them, not all, still looking for some of them, but they're all really great. And if you want, I could create more videos kind of about them, about all the different books and the different characters and novels. And The Lady Vanishes is one of my top 2, and I can talk in another video about my other favourite book of hers. But I thought I would just actually read a bit from it. I might just read you the first chapter if you'd like to hear. Yeah, and I think this is actually really good therapy for me, talking to you, probably more benefit to me than to you. And I might just, as the days go on, carry on reading some of the chapters. So, Chapter 1, Without Regrets. The day before the disaster, Iris Carr had her first premonition of danger. She was used to the protection of a crowd, whom with unconscious flattery she called her friends. An attractive orphan of independent means, she had been surrounded always with clumps of people. They thought for her, or rather she accepted their opinions, and they shouted for her, since her voice was rather too low in register for mass social intercourse. Their constant presence tended to create the illusion that she moved in a large circle, in spite of the fact that the same faces recurred with seasonal regularity. They also made her pleasantly aware of popularity. Her photograph appeared in the pictorial papers through the medium of a photographer's office of publicity after the press announcement of her engagement to one of the crowd. This was fame. Then shortly afterwards her engagement was broken by mutual consent, which was a lawful occasion for the reproduction of another portrait, more fame. And her mother, who died at her birth, might have wept or smiled at these pitiful flickers of human vanity arising like bubbles of marsh grass on the darkness below. When she experienced her first threat of insecurity, Iris was feeling especially well and happy. After an unconventional health holiday, with the triumph of near pioneers, the crowd had swooped down on a beautiful village of picturesque squalor, tucked away in a remote corner of Europe, and taken possession of it by the act of scrawling their names in the visitor's book. Oh, I forgot to say earlier as well. Sorry, I've started this video so many times and I don't know how to edit, so this is just a stream of my consciousness. I'm from Wolverhampton, I have an accent, you've probably noticed. If you don't like it, you've probably already switched off. So this is me, this is my accent. Cool, now we've made that point. When she experienced her first set of insecurity, Iris was feeling especially well and happy after an unconventional health holiday. With the triumph of near pioneers, the crowd had swooped down on a beautiful village of picturesque squalor, tucked away in a remote corner of Europe, and taken possession of it by the act of scrawling their names in the visitor's book. For nearly a month they had invaded the only hotel, to the delightful demoralisation of the innkeeper and his staff. They scrambled up mountains, swam in the lake, and sunbathed on every available slope. When they were indoors, they filled the bar, shouted against the wireless, and tipped for every trifling service. The proprietor beamed at them over his choked cash register, and the smiling waiters gave them preferential treatment, to the legitimate annoyance of the other English guests. To these 6 persons, Iris appeared just one of her crowd, and a typical semi-society girl, vain, selfish, and useless. Naturally, they had no knowledge of redeeming points, a generosity which made her accept the bill as a matter of course when she lunched with her friends, and a real compassion for such cases of hardship which were clamped down under her eyes. But while she was only vaguely conscious of fugitive moments of discontent and self-contempt, she was aware of a fastidious streak which kept her aloof from any tendency to saturnalia. On this holiday she heard Pan's pipes, but had no experience of the kick of his hairy hindquarters. Soon the slack convention of the crowd had been relaxed. They grew brown, they drank and were merry, while matrimonial boundaries became pleasantly blurred. Surrounded by a mixed bag of vague married couples, it was a sharp shock to Iris when one of the women, Olga, suddenly developed a belated sense of property and accused her of stealing a husband. Besides the unpleasantness of the scene, her sense of justice was outraged. She had merely tolerated a neglected male who seemed a spare part in the dislocated domestic machine. It was not her fault that he had lost his head. To make matters worse, at this crisis she failed to notice any signs of real loyalty among her friends, who had plainly enjoyed the excitement. Therefore, to ease the tension, she decided not to travel back to England with the party, but to stay on for 2 days longer alone. She was still feeling sore on the following day when she accompanied the crowd to the little primitive railway station. They'd already reacted to the prospect of a return to civilization. They wore fashionable clothes again and were roughly sorted into legitimate couples as a natural sequence of identification of suitcases and reservations. The train was going to Trieste, which was definitely on the map. It was packed with tourists who were also going back to pavements and lampposts. Forgetful of hillside and starlight, the crowd responded to the general noise and bustle. It seemed to recapture its old loyalty as it clustered round Iris. "Sure you won't be bored, darling? Change your mind and hop on. You've simply got to come." As the whistle was blown, they tried to pull her into their carriage, just as she was, in shorts and nailed boots, and with a brown glaze of sunburn on her unpowdered face. She fought like a boxing kangaroo to break free, and only succeeded in jumping down on the platform as the platform was beginning to slide past the window. Laughing and panting from the struggle, she stood and waved after the receding train until it disappeared round the bend of the gorge. She felt almost guilty as she realised her relief at parting from her friends, but although the holiday had been a success, she had drawn her pleasure chiefly from primeval sources, sun, water and mountain breeze. Steeped in nature, she had vaguely resented the human intrusion. They had all been together too closely and too intimately. At times she had been conscious of jarring notes, a woman's high, thin laugh, the tubby outline of a man's body poised to dive, a continual flippant appeal to "my God." It was true that while she had grown critical of her friends, she had floated with the current. Like the others, she had raved of marvellous scenery, while she accepted it as a matter of course. It was a natural sequence that when one travelled off the map, the landscape improved automatically as the standard of sanitation lapsed. At last she was alone with the mountains and the silence. Below her lay a grass-green lake, sparkling with diamond reflections of the sun. The snowy peaks of distant ranges were silhouetted against a cornflower blue sky. On a hill rose the dark pile of an ancient castle with its 5 turrets pointing upwards like the outspread fingers of a sinister hand. What I love, just as an aside, is she creates such an evocative picture and just a really interesting, really beautiful description. It all seems so lovely, but then those words "sinister hand" and very occasionally in these early chapters you get that sense that there is this kind of impending doom, something awful is about to happen that is really going to test Iris. It's beautiful writing. Everywhere was a riot of colour. The station garden foamed with exotic flowers, flame and yellow, rising from spiked foliage. Higher up the slope, the small wooden hotel was painted ochre and crimson lake. Against the green wall of the gorge rose the last coil of smoke, like floating white feathers. When it had faded away, Iris felt that the last link had been severed between her and the crowd. Blowing a derisive kiss, she turned away and clattered down the steep stony path. When she reached the glacial-fed river, she lingered on the bridge to feed the iced air which arose from the greenish-white boil. Last page of this first chapter. As she thought of yesterday's scene, she vowed that she never wanted to see the crowd again. They were connected with an episode which violated her idea of friendship. She'd been a little fond of the woman Olga, who had repaid her loyalty by a crude exhibition of jealousy. She shrugged away the memory. Here under the limitless blue, people seemed so small, their passions so paltry. They were merely incidental to the passage from the cradle to the grave. One met them and parted from them without regrets. Every minute the gap between her and them was widening. They were streaming away out of her life. At the thought she thrilled with a sense of new freedom, as though her spirit were liberated by the silence and solitude. Sorry, my arm went a bit tired. Yet before many hours had passed, she would have bartered all the glories of nature to have called them back again. Great end to the first chapter. So that is The Lady Vanishes. I have a real passion for Lina White's work. I hope you liked that. Unfortunately, I'm not Tom Hardy reading this to you. But yeah, I've wanted to create video content for a while. I kind of love YouTubers. I found that I have like mental health anxiety struggles, and I found YouTube such a great way to... There's so many great YouTubers on there and great content that I kind of love and I follow, who I've really looked to in kind of times of stress or anxiety. And at the moment, I think with this self-isolation, my dad last year was really ill with kidney disease, so he's in the very vulnerable category, and somebody I know who has had corona, who I saw recently, so it's all been a little bit stressful. It's all been very isolating, so I thought I would put this video out there, mainly for me actually, as a form of comfort, but I hope you like that. I will be creating more videos, regardless if anybody watches, of future chapters of the book, and maybe a bit more about my book collection. Yeah, oh god, my hair is dire. I will probably wear makeup next time, who knows. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this stream of consciousness and this sort of rambling on. I hope you liked it, and I will create a new video soon about Lina White. So thank you, bye guys.